Although I am an active member of the Church of Satan, I do not speak for the Church of Satan. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this installment of the Undertaking Stan Podcast. Very excited this evening to talk about a topic that I think needs more discussion, just all around, but most definitely in funeral care, and that is dealing with veterans. There's no better guest to do that with than Reverend Jeff Bowling, who is the mastermind behind, or at least one of the masterminds behind, the Infernal Legion, which is a group for satanic soldiers to commune and to share camaraderie and all of that stuff. I don't want to give too much away. Reverend Bowling, take it away, sir. Thanks so much for being here.
Hey, thank you for having me. It's a great topic. I'm a big fan of what you're doing. As Satanists, we love life and we do everything we can to celebrate life. And we tend to surround ourselves with a lot of memento mori, but we don't really talk about death that often. So I think what you're doing is really valuable.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And likewise, first off, I want to thank you for your service personally. You know, we first started talking around Veterans Day, kind of setting this up. And of course, you were real busy back during that time.
It's kind of the busy part of the year. Yeah.
Thank you personally for your service on my end of things. And I kind of just want to start out with the basics. If you just want to talk about who you are, where you come from, and maybe lead a little bit into Satanism and how the Legion came about.
Sure. Yeah. So I've told this story numerous times. I was brought into this world kicking and screaming in the dark shadows of the Appalachian Mountains down in Kentucky. Moved around a lot with my grandmother, who raised me because we were part of an apocalyptic death cult. And around my teenage years, I started to get interested in the occult in general. Started researching a lot of stuff into that. About 2-3 years into that, I just got really fed up with essentially all the gobbledygook that's involved in the occult. And I had started writing, crafting my own religion. And around that time, I was working after school at a New Age occult bookshop. And a Church of Satan member came in to order a new copy of the Satanic Bible. And I never heard of the book, so I ordered two. I got it and went back, read it in a night, and was very upset that Anton LaVey had written down my religion decades before me. And I haven't looked back since on that. I found the Church of Satan after looking around a little bit, found the old website. Anyone who's old school remembers the website with the picture of LaVey and the other participants of the Das Tier drama. We're looking for a few outstanding individuals cover screen on the website. Found out they were still active and doing things. In June of 2004, I submitted my membership information and left to join the Army. And when I came home from basic training in AIT, my packet was waiting for me right around Halloween of 2004. So I just celebrated my 20 years of membership in the Church of Satan.
Awesome. Well, yeah, that's an interesting story. I don't think I've ever talked to anyone who's actually been writing down their thoughts and making their own religion. And then I think it's that way for all of us, but not as formal.
Right, right.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, could you speak just a little bit about your military service? What did you do in the Army? What was I think it's called MOS, that sort of stuff?
Yeah. So I joined the Army in 2003 on the delayed entry program. Iraq had just started. So I knew when I enlisted that I was going to be deployed, and boy, was I, numerous times. But yeah, I joined. I ended up serving in field artillery. My MOS changed numbers a couple times because the Army kept changing the categorization, but essentially I was a fire direction specialist in the field artillery. That was the kind of overall job, but they kept changing the designation. So originally it was 13 Echo, then it was 13 Delta. Now I think it's like 13 Juliet or something like that. But essentially, yeah, I was in field artillery. My actual job was to figure out how to get our artillery rounds from the barrel of the gun to the target and give them instructions on that. Unofficially, I ended up doing all kinds of things overseas, from personal security details for like human intelligence and PSYOP units to regular combat patrols to they called it insurgent interdiction, where we'd set up traffic control points basically. trained the Iraqi army on basic maneuvers and stuff like that. The only time I got to do my job was in Afghanistan. That's when, because they actually used artillery in Afghanistan. So I actually got to do my MOS over there. But yeah, the rest of all my time in Iraq was spent doing basically field artillery is the redheaded stepchild of the army. So I did whatever they told me to do, which was a lot of different stuff.
Well, that's thank you for that. I appreciate it. I'm assuming that has to do with a lot of math. Am I right on that?
Yeah, a lot of math, it's kind of a combination between maps, math, and computers. And they have it set up so there's like graphs and template style maps that you have to work with to figure out what the terrain looks like, where the target points are. You have to input this data into a computer system, but anyone who's ever served in the military knows how unreliable military computer systems are. So then you have to have someone doing it on paper next to that to make sure that the numbers match. And you essentially have to do all this in about 3 seconds. Like we have to crunch all these numbers so fast because the reason we're firing those rounds is because some usually infantry unit is in some shit somewhere and they need the support. If they don't get the support, they're all going to die. So we call it fire missions. We take it very seriously, and I call it an office. It was actually the back of a truck. The entire office lights up with fire mission, and everyone gets to work immediately. And we try to because we have to dial them in. Those rounds go down. They land in the wrong place. They inevitably land in the wrong place the first time. And then you have to figure out the steps to get it closer and closer to the target. If you do it well, a good fire mission lasts only 10 seconds before you completely obliterate the enemy. If you don't do it well, a lot of Americans end up coming home in flag draped coffins. So
Not good. I see death every day, but I can't imagine what that's like. I don't think anybody who isn't a soldier and who hasn't been there, I don't think they can either. One thing that we were talking about offline a little bit is just how there are certain jobs that are friendly to each other. There are soldiers, police officers, firefighters, EMTs. They all kind of can have this odd dark humor, but also this way to speak to each other.
yeah.
We're a little bit more comfortable with each other because it's very difficult to speak on things with anybody who's not in the know, basically, just because you don't want to impose, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I kind of want to move on just to the, birth of the Infernal Legion, what brought that together. But right before that, I want to say that what you do shadows what I do a little bit, just because I feel like, as Satanists, we try not to be crybabies. We try not to complain about things we do not subject ourselves to. But at
Right.
the end of the day, we are kind of an underserved demographic, if you will.
Yeah.
For me, if a Satanist were to pass away, let's say where I'm not available, nobody's going to know what to do with them. With veterans and things like that, is speaking to each other and trying to understand. Of course, there's a camaraderie you have, brother to brother, sister to sister, that sort of stuff. But no one would really understand you as a Satanist. Did that play part in trying to bring soldiers together under, one creed?
Yeah, honestly, to kind of summarize it, that was basically the idea that the idea was born. The Infernal Legion was born on a late drunken night in Las Vegas, where
That's all
my
good ideas are.
yeah, that's what they say. The best ideas happen when you're drunk, but you only know they're good if they survive when you're sober. You know? But we had met up. A handful of us were in Vegas to celebrate a fellow member's engagement party. And I ran into another veteran and member, Satanist Raul Atondo. And we got to talking and drinking and eventually walking. And we ended up walking all around downtown Vegas at like 3 o'clock in the morning, devil's hour. And we started talking about, how it would be really cool if there was a way to unite and promote the work of satanic veterans, because there are a lot of us. There's a lot of crossover between Satanism and the military, and there's a lot of Satanists who served in the military. And so that was the initial plan, right? We were like, yeah, maybe we could do like a a grandiose marketing thing for veterans who are, like, oh, you're a veteran and you're, selling widgets. Well, we can promote your widgets. Or you're a veteran and you make music, we can promote your band, or whatever the case may be. And the next day, when I was sober and thinking about this, I realized one of the things I'd always been fed up by with traditional veteran service organizations was how religious they. A lot of them are not explicitly religious, but they're all kind of. It's all kind of there underneath the surface. There's a lot of like open prayers and things like that. And I was like, it'd be really cool if there was a satanic version of that. And then we blended those two ideas together, and that's where the Infernal Legion came from. We modeled it. Obviously, the name is a play on American Legion and the Infernal Empire, and the model for like the way it's structured is based on a little known VSO called the Jewish War Veterans, because Anton LaVey always kind of described us and understood that Satanists are a unique ethnicity almost underneath the surface. That's where our concepts of meta tribe and alien elite and things like that come from. So the idea for the structure of the organization was based around that concept that, much like you have to be a Jewish war veteran in order to join the Jewish war veterans, or you have to be a combat veteran in order to join the veterans of foreign wars, you have to be a Satanist to join the Infernal Legion. But obviously you have to be a veteran as well.
I've listened to you speak on quite a few of your interviews, and I don't think I've heard that part before. So I must have slept off. I must have been slacking off. But
yeah.
And I want to echo what you said there. It's so true in funeral service too. Like, funeral homes are not supposed to be religious, right? Like, right. You should be able to, and we are trained to in school, help any religion or culture that walks through the door. And that's hardly ever the case.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Because you can't be experts in every religion or culture that walks through the door in the first place.
That's very true. And then also just the fact that Christian funerals make money. There's a casket to sell. They're generally against cremation. They're going to want to have a church service. They're going to want to have the bells and whistles, right? So I feel like that's what the funeral industry caters to. Yeah. Everyone else is kind of like second-class citizen. So yeah, that's kind of my thought for starting Undertaking Satan as well. I wanted to do exactly what you said at the top of the show, which is talk about the fact that we love life. We're not about death. We're not death worshipers. We're not some sort of weird cult like that. But we do use memento mori and things like that to live better. So that was the original catalyst. But there's a secondary thing of me being like, nobody knows what to do with us. That
yeah,
that's hopefully, and I have, there are some funeral directors who have contacted me offline and thank me for my contribution and things like that, and then other ones who try to find my license number and get me barred. But yeah, so I had just very kind of similar thought on that. I wanted to move on to kind of a sad topic. Well, this entire thing is a sad topic, I guess, but very recently, the Church of Satan lost a member, Magister Neil Smith, and you were a part of, and the Legion was a part of his services because he was a veteran. I wondered if you could speak about that a little bit.
Yeah. So Magister Smith was a good friend of mine, and he was one of the first 9 Legionnaires. So when Raul and I first came up with this little idea and we built the framework, got all the paperwork in order and all the little things you have to do, we opened it up to accept members. He was one of the first 9 people who reached out. Imagine, me at the time, citizen Jeff Bowling, receiving a message from Magister Neil Smith saying, "Hey, I want in." It was a cool moment for me. But we developed a fast friendship, and he was someone who advised me on a lot of stuff because he served during the Vietnam era in the Army, and he advised me on a lot of stuff that people who hadn't survived that many eras of the military probably wouldn't have understood. Plus, we had a shared love of film noir and good cocktails, so that helped. But when he passed away, obviously it was very upsetting for everyone involved. And Magus Gilmore reached out to me and asked if we would do something for the veteran portion of Neil's life. So I put together some plans and made up some stuff, some new stuff, because this was brand new territory. I knew when I started the Legion that eventually this was something that I was going to have to do. Then it happened, and I wasn't prepared for it at all. The military is rife with ritual and ceremony and regulations on how things are to be done. And Satanism's official funeral ritual ceremony has been out there for a long time in Magus Gilmore's book. So there was already places to pull inspiration from, but now it was, how do I adjust this so that it's, A, something that Neil would have appreciated, B, seamlessly blends these two things together, and C, is uniquely Infernal Legion, so that it's something of ours. And that's where the idea of the horned salute came from. Magus Gilmore and I spoke about that quite often, and together developed what that would look like. I was fortunate enough that Neil had granted the Infernal Legion, me and my fellow officers, his only ever Satanic podcast interview. So I had a wealth of about 2.5 hours worth of his voice telling his own story. So I was able to edit that together into a little piece for that. One of those rich military traditions that I talked about was the playing of taps. And so I was able to incorporate that. And what was initially heartbreaking when I arrived in Poughkeepsie and met up with everyone, Neil's oldest friend was there. And his oldest friend had served in the Air Force. They had met each other in the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California, back at the beginning of both of their service, and had just remained fast friends ever since. And so it was heartbreaking to listen to, his name is Stephen, listen to him mourn his friend, but by virtue of what we were doing, him and I now became fast friends. And so we still speak all the time. So it was bittersweet in that regard. But he was in, and since he was a veteran, he stepped up to help me with that portion of Neil's memorial service, told his story about meeting Neil and little things like that. There was another Legionnaire in the audience, a couple more Legionnaires in the audience who rendered the horn salute when Taps was playing. And while I'm not, and maybe this is something that you will understand as a funeral director, I was sad, obviously, when doing our part of the ceremony, but I was very proud that when Taps finally played at the end of it, that our portion, that part of Neil's life, is what finally broke everybody in the room and got them to cry. And they all needed that. I needed that. So I know that they all needed that. And so I think it was successful. And I think I figured out what went right, what went wrong, and we'll modify it as Legionnaires. Unfortunately, this is what we humans do, pass away. So as we move forward, I'll be able to do it even better next time for the next Legionnaire.
Gotcha. And I was not there at that service, but I've spoken to some people who have been, and I can mention them just because they let me talk about them all the time.
Yeah.
But Kat, who is a funeral director over on the West Coast, and Victor, who is also in the funeral service industry, they both attended, and they were both blown away. Kat's words, I think, when I interviewed her, was, "It's the cleanest service she's ever seen," which is high praise coming from a funeral director. I want to thank you personally for honoring Neil in that way. I'm going to use his first name, even though I find that cheesy. I appreciate it. It touches my black little heart just a little bit, because that's what I want to do. I want to serve people to the best of their ability. And going back to what you said about how people needed to cry, I think Kat and I talked about that too. When you're designing a funeral, your job is to hurt people in the most effective way possible.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah. which is mean, but it's a thing like setting a bone or something of that, something that hurts to feel better. So yeah, that's and I want to ask, did you guys do everything yourself, or did you like call in official military honors for him as well?
So Neil actually passed several months before the memorial service.
Mhm.
So the VA did step in, and he was cremated. So, but the VA stepped in to provide the flag and to lay him to rest with honors. But that was many months before the Satanic memorial service took place. I know you've talked about this on your show before, and as a funeral director, I'm sure you understand. A lot of people don't plan for their death. So, so he passed away at a VA hospital. The VA stepped up and took care of a lot of the quick stuff, disposing of the body, laying him to rest, making sure that the flag was presented and stuff like that. But it was on Neil's family and friends to plan the funeral, and because getting a group of Satanists together is like herding cats, that took several months to accomplish.
Very much, yeah, I would assume.
There are ways in which to involve the VA or to get a funeral detail to a memorial service, but with all the things involved and everything that we were doing, it was easier just to have the Infernal Legion do the veteran part ourselves.
Yeah, and that's very common. We can pull off a what we call like a faux military service if we have to. That generally occurs in situations just like this one. So people are only allowed to have official military honors once. But a lot of times it'll happen where a person passes away in one state and they want military honors before they leave the state, but they're going to be buried in another state. Military honors are traditionally given at graveside. They don't have to be. And I kind of want to push some things out there that's like, oh, the more you know type of stuff. Because a lot of people
Absolutely,
don't
yeah.
know.
A lot of veterans don't know this stuff.
The detail will come to any location you ask them to come to. But a lot of people, and it's because of the movies, right? You see military honors on the movies and it's like, oh, okay, well, it has to be at the cemetery. No, it does not.
No.
So thank you for clearing that up. Here's a fun question for you. And it's a thing that like it's a pet peeve of mine. So do you know the difference between a 3-gun volley and a 21-gun salute?
That was actually something I was like, I've got to make sure I bring that up since we're talking about funerals on this show, because so many people assume that because generally speaking, there's 7 people on the firing line and they fire 3 volleys that equals 21. That's where 21-gun salute comes from. Not the same thing at all. The 21-gun salute, or the presidential salute, or the salute to the nation, depending on who you're talking to and when, is a Navy tradition to essentially honor the president and the country. The 3 volley firing line, or the honor volleys, or whatever it's called. I forget the exact title. That is a tradition that goes back to ancient Rome that we still use, and the fact that the shots most of the time equal 21 has nothing to do. It's an accident essentially.
Yeah, that's a big thing. A lot of times, so families can apply for military honors themselves. But I've had certain people who are like, oh, I applied for a 21-gun salute. And I'm like, well, you're not the president, so you're not going to get that.
Right.
But yeah.
And I don't think you're close enough to the ocean to have a warship
Yeah.
come
Yeah.
up.
So that's his, I think, just kind of a little feather in my cap. I did get to organize a flyover once for a funeral.
Oh, wow.
And by that, I mean, I sent 2 emails, but I still say I organized a flyover because it's not cool.
Well, we always pad our resume, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of little things like that that even veterans don't know. Another thing that people don't know, and that is often kind of a sticking point, is that the 3-gun volley is not guaranteed. The military, the branch does not send people to do the rifle volley. That is coordinated by the funeral director with a local legion or VFW and auxiliary group. And that does cost money. So
yeah. If a service member passes away while on active duty,
it's completely different.
It's
completely different.
There's a lot that, and I'm sure we'll get into like what that ceremony looks like.
Yeah.
But so, we are specifically talking about people past service, whether retired or discharged.
Yeah. Yeah. This is for kind of your everyday soldier who would pass away. Yeah.
Yeah. There is one thing that I think is really important to mention because veterans don't know this. Almost every veteran I've talked to does not know this. Burial in a national cemetery is not a guaranteed thing either.
No.
It depends greatly. First of all, it depends on your type of discharge. So if you retire or are discharged honorably, you do qualify to be buried in a national cemetery. But in order to do that, you have to register. And you have to register while you're alive because the waiting list is very long. And there are some national cemeteries who are so full that they're only accepting cremated remains at this point. And so if you're not registered, if you're not on that list, you're not going to get in. If you are registered, when you pass away, it depends on if they have the room or not. If
Right.
they don't have any openings in that moment, then you're not getting in. And it's like, I think a lot of veterans just assume, oh, well, I'm honorably discharged. I'll get buried in Arlington. That's not how that works.
No. And to that point, so I'm in an area where I'm lucky to have it's run by the state, but it is a newly put together cemetery that has plenty of space. And then I'm also kind of centrally located between two others that are very much as you just described. So it really depends on, yeah, you need to, and a way to subjugate that is to talk to the funeral home. That process that you just described, funeral directors know how to get you pre-registered for that, and they'll be able to communicate with the cemeteries and try to place you. Now, obviously, that means that you don't have say over where you go. That's another thing. So, and this is something I wanted to touch on. Military cemeteries a lot of times anger families because
I'm not surprised.
no,
Not surprised.
it's not because they do anything wrong. It's because they're run by civilians, but those civilians are still adhering to military protocol.
Yeah.
So, like, example, if I'm in a private cemetery, I can request, hey, open the grave day before, fill it in the day after, and then we just kind of hang out there all day. At a veterans cemetery, it's very much you pull up to this point with 5 minutes till. Nobody gets out of their vehicles. That's point one. You then communicate with this person. They get into a vehicle and lead you down to point two. That is where everyone exits their vehicle, gets into this place in a timely fashion. If there is a speaker, they have 5 minutes to speak.
Yeah.
After that, military honors will be rendered. After that, everyone goes to their vehicle and they exit. Because that really chafes some folks. And that's a little bit of an exaggeration, folks, to tell you the truth. And every cemetery is different, I'm sure.
But on paper, that's exactly.
And the people who run these cemeteries are sweethearts. They don't do it for the money. You know what I mean? So they're going to help you out. But what I tell folks is like, so this amount of rigidity that you're experiencing for 24 hours, that's what your loved one experienced the entire time they were in the military, to the nth degree. So that's how they felt.
Exactly. Yeah. It's the military is wonderfully inefficient in its efficiency. It's everything is lockstep. Everything has protocol. Everything has regulation. I wanted to prepare for the podcast. I wanted to know exactly what I was talking about. So I refreshed myself on the Army Field Manual for memorial services. And it was like down to the way that the buttons on the uniform are done on the deceased. It is like everything is within like little fractions of an inch and at specific times. And it's crazy. It's crazy. And it makes it's so bureaucratic and quote unquote efficient that it makes it inefficient in the long run. That's why there's always variations no matter where you're going to experience it. But they all kind of follow that same framework that you're describing.
I'll go over and kind of talk about active duty death just to show people the difference, right? So what we were just describing is a soldier who retired from the military, was a veteran, and passes away as a civilian. Active duty deaths are a lot different. So I've only had to deal with two. I'm not going to lie to you, they're my least favorite other than children, just because of the level of stress that they bring on, partly because of what you said. So if the soldier passes away of natural causes or what have you outside when they're a veteran, then there's nobody putting eyes on me as a funeral director, like measuring his buttons and things like that.
Right. Yeah.
If it's a active duty case where the person passed away as a direct result of combat, it's very much that way. So the first one I ever dealt with, deceased was flown into an airport that was not even in my state. It was in the state next to me. And I was called and instructed to take the immediate family in the funeral home's Escalades, which we use as limos. Mm-hmm. We drove directly onto the tarmac at a certain point, and then the casket was offloaded at that point with the flag draped. I think they used another funeral home that was local there for the coach, the casket coach. Okay. They were placed into the casket coach by members in full uniform. And then I was instructed by the commander that this is going to be treated like a convoy. These vehicles do not stop. We will have an escort from this state to the next state. There are 2 points where the family can stop and grab food and can pee. If you hit anything and your vehicle is still moving, keep going. It'll be taken care of later. Okay. So the worst part for me and the family was that there were newer Escalades that had if you go over like 80 miles an hour, it just constantly dings at you and won't shut.
Okay. It's like a variation of a governor. Yeah.
Yeah. We were going like 85, 90 the whole way down the freeway. And so then at that point, we got to the funeral home. The pallbearers there came out and took the casket from there to the bier. And then a visitation took place that evening. And then for the service, another thing, if you ever see a soldier in uniform that's a part of any sort of military honors or services, they're not allowed to talk to you. Right. And they're not allowed to show emotion. They're not allowed to sit. So these pallbearers stood in formation at the back of the chapel I would assume, I don't know the difference, attention or parade rest, one of the two.
People were like, arms behind your back is parade rest.
Yeah. And so people are obviously like trying to give them chairs and stuff because
right.
They won't take selfies with you. That's another thing I see a lot.
I don't know why people want to do that. Like,
yeah, I don't know, but people are people. But so that's kind of the difference between an active duty death and a veteran death. So. Before we hear the rest of Reverend Bowling's story, let me just cut in here for a minute with a couple of reminders. If you'd like to communicate with me, Grendal, at the Undertaking Satan Podcast, best way to do that is by email. That is undertakingsatan@gmail.com. If you'd like to find our social media, we are available on X, we are available on Facebook, and we are available on Instagram. However, if you would like to be on the show or have a question for the show, please email. You can check all of this out and more over at the Undertaking Satan landing page, which is, of course, undertakingsatanpodcast.com. And for just a little bit of a break from this sadness that we're all experiencing because of this episode, as good as it may be, let's have a little bit of festive holiday fun, shall we, and check in with the boys at the funeral home.
Hey boss, how was your weekend off?
Pretty good, I guess. Did we get any calls this weekend?
Just one. Benny Brooks is the name.
Benny Brooks. Why does that sound so familiar? Oh, you mean Benny the Elf?
Boss, I don't think you can call him that anymore.
Why not? He played the elf for Santa Claus down at the mall for as long as I can remember. He used to scare the shit out of me when I was a kid.
Well, I met with the family yesterday. We might have a bit of a problem.
How much did they spend?
That's not the problem. They paid in full on everything. They don't think they should have to pay full price for the casket.
So what's the problem?
They wanted to see if you'd come down to half price for him.
And why would I do that?
Well, he's really only going to use half of it.
Wait, so I can't make fun of his height, but the family can make jokes? Come on.
No, boss, they're serious.
Well, they do have sort of a point. Don't they want to use something else, like a shoebox or a...
Boss, stop it.
Okay, I'll go down to half price, but mostly just because it's funny.
There's one more thing, though.
What now? I don't know how such a little person can be such a big pain in my ass.
They want to bring in a few things to bury in the casket with him.
Like what?
I got the list right here, let's see. Looks like they want to bury him in his elf costume. And in the foot of the casket, they want to put 2 battle axes, a case of Keebler elf cookies, a step ladder, a cauldron filled with gold coins, his official membership plaque to the Lollipop Guild, one golden ring to rule them all, and a signed box set of the Game of Thrones series autographed by Peter Dinklage.
I hate you so much.
And now, back to the interview.
And I am unfortunate enough to have experienced several comrades' deaths overseas. And there's much like what happened with Neil, where, he passed and the VA stepped in to, help cremate the remains and do that part of it. And then a few months down the road, we had a memorial service. There's two things that happen in that situation as well, because the remains have to immediately be shipped back to the United States to be with their family. And so I'll just kind of talk about this for a minute. My first time experiencing real war was on 11 May 2006, when my patrol hit an IED. And two gentlemen in our patrol set were killed by this IED. One of them was in pieces. And so we collected in big old trash bags as many pieces of him as we could find. This is while we're securing the area, calling in for, quick reaction force support, bracing for secondary attacks, trying to figure out the source of the, primary, like doing military stuff. We're also collecting the pieces of Eric Clark. Those pieces essentially got dumped into a body bag that was then put in the casket that was then shipped back. And that whole process, from him being blown up to the time that he was on the plane in the casket on his way back home, was probably less than 3 hours. It happens very, very fast. Well, that doesn't give the soldiers that serve with them any kind of time to grieve or whatever. So immediately, within a week, we had a memorial service set up in the chapel. And so we have the soldier's cross. And for those who don't know what a soldier's cross is, you take the service member's rifle, attach a bayonet, jam it into the ground. You put their boots in front of the rifle, you hang their dog tags off the rifle, and you put their Kevlar helmet on top of the butt of the rifle. And it kind of forms a monument to the now deceased soldier. And at the beginning of the memorial service, everyone will walk up and they might leave coins or something of that they shared with the person, or just talk to the soldier's cross as if they're talking to the actual person. And after they spend approximately 2 to 3 minutes each, they'll render a salute to the soldier's cross and then take their seat. Once the ceremony begins, you have for every, like in this situation, we had 2 service members who had passed, 2 soldiers. I read the eulogy for Steven Snowberger, who was, on top of being in the same patrol, was also my roommate in Iraq. And then another soldier read the eulogy for Eric Clark. And then we have words from the commander, we have words from the sergeant major, we have words from whatever commanding officers over our unit. In this case, it was a 2-star general who came in to give words. And then the first sergeant calls everyone to attention and does the final roll call. And in this situation, the squad section is what we call it in artillery, but the squad, Stephen and Eric's squad stood up and he called off their names, starting with the section leader or the squad leader and going down until he got to their name. And you read their name. So for Stephen, it was PFC Snowberger. And you wait for an answer. Obviously, there's no answer because he's not there. And then you say his full name, PFC Stephen Snowberger. He doesn't answer. And then you read the full name. So in his case, it was, PFC Stephen P. Snowberger III. And you wait for an appropriate amount of time. And when there's not an answer, TAPS begins. And TAPS is the answer to the roll call. After TAPS comes the volley. And this was done at the chapel. We're in Iraq, obviously, so firing a weapon wasn't too big of a deal. But because we're indoors at a chapel, they opened the side double doors, and the the firing line was standing right outside of those doors and fired into the air from there. So that all is happening while the remains of these two are in the air. I think they were over Germany at the time, on their way back to the United States. That's happening. And then, of course, the family is going to receive these remains and start whatever plans they need to, usually involving a funeral director and things like that. So that's kind of what happens in the combat zone when someone passes away.
That's great. Thanks for showing the other half of that coin. I actually did not know a lot of that, so that's very informative to me as well. Yeah, it is a giant to do, as it should be when a soldier passes away, or is killed in the line of duty. That's the importance of soldiers groups, of things like the Infernal Legion, also more traditional like the American Legion, VFW, things like that, because there's no one that soldiers can share that grief with other than other soldiers.
Right.
And so that's a big role that they play, in addition to the mechanical stuff, right?
Yeah.
So again, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but you said it yourself. Everything associated with the VA, the military, stuff like that is pretty much bureaucratic chaos.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah. It's a nightmare.
for me, it's great to have contacts inside of these organizations who can help a soldier quicker because they know how to get through the VA paperwork quicker.
Right.
Or they know how to, if this person's on disability, they know who to get them to go to see and how to get an appointment with that person quicker.
Right.
Because at the funeral home level, I do have situations where a veteran is on hospice care and they're still trying to line up health stuff in some regards. So it helps us to have contacts inside of these places because we're not really privy to it. We're on the outside. Yeah, it's invaluable. So
there's a lot of jargon to translate too. For example, my father-in-law passed away earlier this year, and he was a veteran. And I was before he passed away, so like late last year, he was going through, the downturn in his health, and the VA had recommended hospice care for him, and so my wife's side of the family is freaking out about this. And they're like, when you got the VA involved, I thought they were going to help, but now they're talking about a hospice. And I was like, calm down. Let's find out what's going on. And so I had to do some digging on my own and reach out to his VSO in the state he was in and talk to people. Only come to find out that the VA classifies hospice care as anything that's round the clock care. Hospice care traditionally means end of life care. Mm-hmm. But anything that requires a live-in nurse is classified as hospice by the VA. So way to freak out the family. Now, mind you, a few months later, he did actually pass. So the term was kind of appropriate, but that wasn't what they intended by it, and had completely freaked out his family because they're using a different set of terms than the average civilian medical facility would be using.
I'm going to throw this one on you to kind of close maybe, how important, because as Satanists, we're atheists, obviously.
Of course, yeah.
How important is military honors at your service to you?
That's a weird question, right? How do I answer that? Because funerals are for the living, right? They're never for the dead. How many people, I'm sure, have attended a funeral and gone like, Gregory wouldn't want this, like this isn't how he'd want to be remembered. Obviously, because he's not there to make that decision. It was the family and the friends that made the decision. The ceremony is for the living. But the military is a warrior culture. And inside a warrior culture, there's a reverence for the dead that is above and beyond what most civilians experience, because it's not based on martyrdom. It's based on heroism. And so, and this goes back to, ancient times as well, where warriors who fall in combat are revered because they did something we all secretly want to do. Just go out with a bang, And I know that sounds weird, right? To hear from a Satanist, because of course nobody likes to leave a good party, and life is a party. But there is always going to be a part of me, because I was a soldier, who longs for the glorious death. If I'm gonna go, I want to go out in bright, bloody fashion. So that's what you're celebrating. You're celebrating the warrior nature of the person who has passed. And while it won't matter to me because I'm gone, I'd like to think that some military honors would take place when I'm gone, because my family, my friends know how important my time in the service was to me. I mean, hell, I've made it part of my life's mission at this point. So I would like to think that they'd include that. But if they don't, I'm obviously not going to be upset by it.
Very true. And that's my, and again, we don't like giving advice, but hey, if you're listening to this, you're asking for it. Do what's best for the living people around, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
I've had situations where there are veterans. I find this very common in the Vietnam era, where the veteran came home, they were not treated as a hero. They were not even treated as a human in some respects. And so they were very quiet about their service, and they've instructed their family to say, hey, I don't want this. I don't want military stuff. No honors, no nothing. And of course, as a funeral director, I'm morally and legally obligated to follow what the family wants.
Of course, yeah.
So at that point, I'm not going to insist that they get military honors. I'm not going to push, but I do try to emphasize the point that, just as you said, those honors aren't for him at that point. They're for everyone else.
Yeah, exactly.
And
yeah.
even if a lot of those people who pass away and do not want the honors, their military service probably was important to them, but they don't see it as needing to be celebrated. But
Sure.
Down the line, the family is very proud of Grandpa because he served. So that's what it's about at that point. Grandpa's done his fighting now, so
Right.
And that's I guess my opinion on it. But again, as a funeral director, I am an extension of the family's will. So
Exactly, yeah. And that for you specifically, that has to sometimes be very difficult to, not just with the military in general, but I'm sure you've got all kinds of stories of families who wanted some weird shit done for a funeral.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, a lot. I think in the military vein, I had, and this is very weird, and it was very I can speak about it now. This is when I first started. I wasn't even a funeral director at this point. I was just living in a funeral home and kind of working grief counseling stuff.
Mhm.
And I was privy to this. But there was one individual who had both a Confederate funeral and was also a veteran, and had a traditional military funeral as well, which is one of the weirdest things I've ever come across. And how that happened is there is a organization in the South. Well, if you can prove your lineage back to a Confederate officer, there's a group of reenactors that will come and give you Confederate rights.
Oh, okay.
And so that was done for this gentleman, and he was also a veteran as well. So then the next day, I think he was in the Marines, if I remember. The Marines came in and gave him funeral honors.
Oh,
As
so
well.
they didn't do it together. That's interesting.
No, absolutely not. And we were, that would not have went well. If I have Confederate.
Well, it's funny because a lot of
there.
people don't realize that. I think most Americans don't realize that Confederate soldiers are considered veterans under the title. I think it's Title 9 of the United States Code.
Gotcha.
It was part of the reconciliation after the Civil War. They made it official that Confederates are to be considered veterans along with any other soldier before or since.
And that does ring a very old mortuary school bell back
right.
there. Yeah. Yeah.
So I was actually shocked. I recently went through the registration process for a national cemetery. I don't plan on being laid to rest whole. I plan on being cremated. But I was like, I'm going to get this. I'm going to get on the registry because I'm not the one handling my remains once I'm gone. So I'd make this a little bit easier on the family, and it's when you go through the process, it starts with your local area. I don't plan on being buried in my local area, but that's where it tries to get you to go to the nearest to register for the nearest cemetery. And I was very surprised. I currently live in Ohio, and anyone who knows the history of the Civil War knows Ohio's involvement in the Civil War. So I was very surprised that the nearest national cemetery to me was a Confederate cemetery uh, outside of Columbus, Ohio. And I said, why is there a Confederate cemetery in Ohio? For those of you who are not familiar with Civil War history, Ohio, it was an Ohio regiment that Sherman led down to Atlanta to burn it to the ground after the Civil War was officially over. Our hockey team is called the Blue Jackets for a reason. So I was very shocked to find out there was a Confederate cemetery in Columbus, Ohio. And they were trying to get me to be buried.
Yeah. Uh, but yeah, well, Reverend Bowling, any other questions you have? Any other things you want to just stick in there? What are you up to lately? Any new projects or anything like that?
Well, before I get into that, I do think we'd be remiss not to mention that we just passed the anniversary because we kind of started by talking about Magister Neil Smith's memorial service. We just passed the anniversary of the first ever satanic funeral, which was held in 1967 for Petty Officer Edward Olson in San Francisco. Um, and much like I had to do when designing the Infernal Legion's portion of Neil's service, Magus LeVay had to come up with a satanic funeral for Edward Olson, and it was conducted with full military honors because he was on active duty when he died. Um, and it made the papers. It was on the front page of San Francisco Chronicle. It's been featured in numerous documentaries about that. That just happened on, it was December 8th, 1967. So we just passed that anniversary. I'm going to make sure I mentioned that. But yeah, the Infernal Legion is there. We're all over social media. Find us on Facebook, find us on Instagram, on X. Don't have a Blue Sky yet, but I'm kind of doing that on my personal account. We also have a monthly podcast that's on Radio Free Satan. We kind of alternate between what we call the episode Sinister Scuttlebutt, which is all the news you need to know around the military. And then the other is Wicked Warrior episodes where we interview Legionnaires and let them tell their stories. If you are a veteran who is a member of the Church of Satan, please visit infernallegion.net and join the Legion. We'd love to have you because, like you said, one of the primary motivators behind this is the camaraderie that we had in the service we don't necessarily have in the civilian world. So the Infernal Legion is a way for us satanic veterans to have that camaraderie once again. I think that's all my stuff. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm glad you brought up that the first ever satanic funeral. I was actually went down a satanic funeral nerd rabbit hole, and I contacted the cemetery where he's buried. My goal was I really wanted to see if I could get into contact with the funeral director who handled the case, if they're still living.
That would have been really neat. Yeah.
And I got stonewalled on getting information. So I don't think the funeral home is under the same ownership as it was back then and all this other stuff. But I annoyed some sweet office lady for about 2 weeks with questions. So yeah, again, it's weird to say favorite thing about a funeral, but in the pictures that are of that service, there's a really awesome floral Baphomet.
Yes.
And,
yeah.
I was like, what florist? Because I have a lot of interaction with florists as a funeral director. And I'm like, what florist pulled that off? Like that, I don't know. Just a side note, but yeah.
Especially back in 1967 when the sigil of Baphomet was a relatively obscure symbol. It certainly wasn't on every hoodie that every teenager's wearing around,
Oh, I will answer here just real quick. I did the only question I've ever received at Undertaking Satan regarding military burial and things like that. I responded back directly to the person because they didn't want to be identified publicly, but has to do with military headstones and if you can get a Baphomet on your military headstone.
That's a great question, actually. Yes, that is a great question. I'm going to steal a line from Magister Robert Merciless, we need a dead Satanist. Currently, the Sigil of Baphomet, though the Church of Satan and Satanism is recognized as a religion within the military, which has its own recognition process for religions, the Sigil of Baphomet is not an authorized symbol for military headstones. The reason for that is primarily because no one has filled out the paperwork requesting it and then died so that paperwork has to be processed. Without that, and obviously Magister Neil Smith didn't do it because he was cremated, so he doesn't have a headstone. Until that happens, and I filled out the paperwork, the officers in the Legion have filled out the paperwork, until a veteran croaks and that paperwork has to be processed, it won't happen. So, I mean, if anyone out there is not feeling too well, no, I'm kidding. But yeah, that's essentially what has happened. If you are even if you're not a member of the Legion, I do want to stress that we have Legionnaires, our membership within the Infernal Legion, but we are here to serve Satanic veterans all around. So if you are a Satanist and a veteran and you don't want to be a member of the Legion, but you still need a VSO, we have one of those. You still need help with your disability process, we have the abilities to do that. If you want to fill out this form, please, by all means, get in contact with me or with Magister Merciless, and we will make sure you get that paperwork in your hand so you can fill it out, so that when you die and your headstone goes to be made, the military now has to process that and apply the Sigil of Baphomet to your headstone. And once that's done, it's there. All you have to do is request it.
To me, that's kind of cool, being like the Legion might be responsible for the first ever Sigil of Baphomet.
Yeah, maybe.
So, yeah. I mean, again, I don't want to hope for that. Everyone, hope you're doing well. But
right.
Yeah. So awesome. Well, I think that kind of wraps up everything that I have. Anything else you want to just touch on?
Yeah, I did want to ask you, because this is something even though we soldiers deal with death, that's our trade, and I've done a few now in combat zones here in the States, and now with the Legion for Magister Smith. I don't know what the first step is. So you're a funeral director. If a family member of a veteran who's recently passed wants to get this ball rolling, what is the first thing they need to do?
So I would suggest selecting a funeral home of choice. So what that would look like is just figuring out who you want to handle your demise when it happens. And then I would suggest going in and giving them a copy of the soldier's DD-214 because they'll want to have that on file.
Yeah.
And then also, if they are wanting to be inside of a national cemetery, as we spoke about before, you're definitely going to want to get that paperwork rolling early. Those are the main things. So on every death certificate, I believe in America, we are required to answer the question, was this person a veteran?
Mhm.
So we will figure it out at some point, no matter what. But if that, the sooner the better for the funeral director type of thing. Same thing with an at-need death or someone who passes away without any sort of pre-planning. You're going to want to make sure to bring in that DD-214 to the funeral home. Another kind of sticking point, that is the only document that will qualify. So it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I've had guys, all of his shooting records, everything, didn't have the DD-214. Sorry, can't do it for you.
Right.
So that's one of those faux funeral things that we sometimes have to do if there's a paperwork issue. Also, there's a notorious fire in Missouri somewhere that burned up.
Oh, yeah. The National Archives. Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of people, they have lost their documents in that fire. So they can be hard to find and I can't remember the time period kind of when that affects.
It's basically, unfortunately, it's before and currently the age of veterans who are starting to pass away in high numbers, right?
Yes.
Because I think I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it happened in the early 70s.
Mhm.
And so anything before then is what was affected. And right now is when all the Vietnam and Korea guys are finally starting to fill up those national cemeteries,
Right.
unfortunately. So yeah, I don't envy your task in helping these people track down paperwork.
Yeah. Ways around that if you're looking for a DD-214, just because it might be helpful to people out there. If they've ever required or if they've ever applied for like a home loan, using the I forget what it's called, but the VA
The VA
sponsored,
home loan, yeah.
the county generally keeps a copy of the DD-214 on file. Also, if they've ever received VA care,
Yes.
generally the VA has replicated that lost DD-214 with paperwork that will suffice, gotten
Yeah.
them a new one, basically. So those are kind of two ways if you're looking for, and a lot of people, they're like, I don't know where this single piece of paper is and all the stacks of paper that, mom had, you know. So the,
I was fortunate. The military has always had an issue transitioning soldiers to civilian life. But they are constantly making progress on that. And I was fortunate that when I was getting out, it was beat into my skull how important the DD-214 was. It was the keys to the kingdom. Now everything is digital, so I just had to log into the VA website to find a copy. But when I first got out, it wasn't the case. So I took it to the county recorder and made sure it was recorded. I made official copies of it and put them in 3 different places. But veterans before my time were never told how important that document is. I mean, it's the only thing that proves you were ever in the military. And with that comes all sorts of benefits and status and things that you actually need in life.
definitely. So yeah, that's to answer your question, DD-214 is very important for our work. And then also there are like benefits and things like that that a soldier may be eligible for. And
Mhm.
there's a packet that most funeral homes will have kind of put together. I don't want to get into all this because it's super complicated, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
like
yeah.
a person who passes away at a VA sponsored or owned place gets more benefits than other folks do. The military is not going to pay for the full funeral. A lot of folks are under that
That's a big point. I
impression.
didn't think to mention that. Yeah.
Yeah, they do not pay for hardly anything. They do. I think a lot of people get that confused with the headstones because they're free, and that's
Yeah.
true. But yeah, we can provide you with that packet to fill out and kind of shadow you as you fill it out. Technically, funeral directors are not supposed to help families fill that out, but we can't fill it out for them, certainly.
Right, right.
But that we can assist you in doing that. So those are the things that you would want to get together. Also, if the person wants to be buried in their uniform, maybe know where that's at. Don't
And make
worry
sure it
about,
fits, I'd assume.
yeah, we'll take care of that. If it don't worry about arranging all of the pins and things like that. We do that.
That's good
There's
to
always
know.
one.
It's good to
Yeah.
know.
There's if you want to do it, if you know you're like passing away in hospice and you want it right, go ahead. We won't change it.
Right.
But a lot of times families worry about that. They try to put all that stuff on and they don't know how and they're trying to Google it. And yeah, don't worry about that part. That's really all I can think of right now for kind of first steps, either in the pre-planning
Right.
process or the at-need process.
Well, and that's why people in your profession are so important in the death process because you just have to kind of know what to do to get started. But once you walk in the doors, you're there and you can help them from there.
Yeah,
And that's
very
that's
much.
really important. But if they never walk in the door,
Yeah, yeah. And most people don't. I mean, to tell
right.
you the truth, it's a hard thing to walk into a funeral home when you don't have to. You know,
Yeah.
it's a hard thing to sell. And oh, here's another. This is my caveat. Something that pisses me off. If a funeral home ever tries to charge you for anything associated with registering for military stuff, do not use them.
Right.
This is something that's been popping up in the last few years, and it's atrocious. There should be no additional fee to file for like a presidential memorial certificate, which is another
Right.
thing I didn't mention. But yeah, there should be no extra fee from the funeral home side to process paperwork and things like that. They're not a veteran-friendly funeral home if they are charging for things that they shouldn't be. So watch out for that. Also, the certificate I just mentioned, this is something a lot of people don't know. You can apply for a gold embossed certificate signed by the current president of the United States. And you can get as many as you want. So they're great things for, like, you know, the grandkids, like everyone in the family can get one if you want. A lot of funeral directors don't mention that because they don't want to do the extra paperwork. But if you mention it, they will. So, and we can keep going on forever.
As you know, death is a very integral process. There's a lot going on there. So, we could talk, I'm sure, for days and still not get everything out there. But I mean, the first steps are the important part. And I do think it's important as society kind of changes, social norms kind of change, to understand the importance of the traditions, the rituals, and the ceremonies that the military has and why they're in place. We talked earlier about gallows humor. A lot of people don't know that taps was actually it's obviously the official death song of the military, but it was a reworking of a French bugle call called Tattoo, which was played to tell soldiers it was time to stop drinking and come back to the barracks. So it wasn't an original piece of music when it was written back in, I think, 1795, if I remember correctly. It was a reworking of that French call, and now it is the death call for soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines. So it's baked right into our core, that gallows humor.
Certainly. It's something that we share kind of on the death industry side of things too. And if you don't laugh, you go insane, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, that's how it is. Well, Reverend Bowling, thank you so much. This is already one of my favorite episodes, I can tell.
I'm happy to hear that.
This is Grendal signing off, I guess. I will say this before we go, and I'm hesitant to do this, but just kind of in the spirit of what we've been talking about. I will not step on any funeral director's toes. That's something I will not do. But I will say this publicly, that if you have questions about funeral stuff for a specific family member, things like that, I will answer your questions for you if you can prove that you are a legitimate Satanist. That's something that I think is important. I think that that's something that you at the Legion are kind of at the forefront of, is making sure that people out there get what they need. I don't want to be a carpetbagger, basically. But I will say it publicly that if you need to talk to a satanic funeral director, I will listen to you. So with that, thank you so much. We'll see you in the next one. Bye now.